Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am Zelzelzel, the Zelazel, and welcome to Amateur Apologetics. Today we are picking up where we left off in Matthew, and of course I have my dearest and one and only sibling, Lunar Smiles. How are you, Lunar?
Oh, hello there. I'm doing okay. Getting over being sick, but doing pretty good.
Awesome. Of course, we have Coco in the crowd right now. Really love it. And I have an AI bot trying it out today just because I'm curious. You can customize it if you pay for the thing. I tried to actually create my own, and I know how to do it, but for some reason it wasn't implementing correctly. So I have this idea for something called Buddy Zell or Little Zell or something like that, and I'm going to have like a little chibi version that's an AI that basically uses Chat GPT as it is right now. Yeah. So it's kind of doing what I wanted to do, where once in a while people who talk it'll respond, or if there's a topic that is being discussed in chat, it should respond relatively coherently. So we'll see what's going on. But yeah, if you do see my AI bot pop up once in a while, that's what's going on right now. So and for those who haven't figured out yet, I also have brand new overlays. Actually, this is the main one that we'll be using today, but I have a couple of different ones. If I'm just chatting by myself, this is the one I'll probably use. It's a little big. I should probably put one light on so I don't look like a pasty, blanched person or anything like that. But yeah, so today we're going to be continuing our Bible reading. So last time, I'm going to go back to here, just so Lunar can participate as well. Last time we were talking about a couple of different things that happened with Jesus and some other fellers. Particularly John the Baptist was beheaded in Matthew chapter 13, all on account of adultery is really what it comes down to, is the lengths people will go to. And that's sort of, to me, the principle of the story is the lengths that people will go to defend or to assert their rights to behave however they want to behave. So there's a sort of a ruler in town kind of thing, and John the Baptist said, hey, you shouldn't take your I think it was his uncle or his brother, I think it was his brother's wife, and sleep with her and have her Herodias to hang around with. And basically Herodias convinced her daughter, who kind of pleased them as in a kind of a lascivious dance sort of thing. Kind of a burlesque is what I wanted to say last time. It was almost like a burlesque kind of dance, most likely. And convinced her father-in-law or uncle or whatever you want to call the guy at that point to behead John the Baptist, who was in jail at the time. And then and yet Jesus sort of says, he was such a faithful guy, but he was the least in the kingdom of heaven when it actually comes into its fullness. So but yeah, before that or after that, if I remember correctly, Jesus was also talking in parables. So parables essentially are themed stories that have a deeper point, and he sort of talks around or gives a principled story, a metaphor, if you will, and sort of says it to these people, and it's sort of like a common sense kind of thing. It's like, so a good example would be like a mechanic had a car, and then there's another mechanic, and the first mechanic decided to treat his car well, oil it constantly, behave properly. The other mechanic decided to run it, into the ground, and then at the end of the story, one doesn't, one manages to have a long lifespan, and the other one, the car bottoms out or something like that halfway through its lifespan. And then he applies a spiritual principle to those stories, and that's essentially what a parable is like. And so he's got something like the parable of the sower, which is kind of his most interesting one, I think, which is this idea of spreading seed upon the ground, and the type of ground on which that seed falls is the type of crop that you can expect. The seed itself, which you can, in the metaphor, it's truth, the truth of the matter, doesn't change. The quality of what the word actually is pure. It's good. It will, in the proper conditions, always produce something of value. And so the truth, when cast out, has it like you have the responsibility as the one who casts is to just throw it out there. But the responsibility also happens to be on the ground on which it falls upon. So rocky soil doesn't take long, and so it can be easily trampled upon on the road and everything like that, and so that won't grow. But if you put it in a fertile soil, for example, and it's the idea of somebody who's already prepared, whose heart is open to receive truth, only that person will be changed by it, will grow and will produce more seed in its own right and be able to produce fruit. So anyway, those are the type of things that Jesus does. And so, yeah, we come then, of course, to Matthew 15, and he's sort of kind of going toe-to-toe with some Pharisees and Sadducees. And if Lunar would love to pick us off here, we can continue.
Sure. Pick it up, pick it off, pick it out, whatever you want.
Yeah, pick it up.
That which defiles. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." And Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, then they are not to honor their father and mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachers are merely human rules."
I'm just going to touch on this for 2 seconds. This is actually a Jewish tradition, is what he's talking about here, and it's actually called to harem something, and so it actually comes from the same root word as a harem, very common in kind of, what would you say, anime or similar stories and everything like that. But the true idea of a harem, so for example, Solomon had a harem of women, and it wasn't a bunch of women, for example, that one was allowed to just sleep with willy-nilly or anything like that, but they are actually, what it meant to be is set aside for the Lord. It was actually meant to be something that is holy. And so oftentimes a harem would be, if I remember correctly, it would be like a delegation from another kingdom would come to a king and say, "Let's have a peace between us, and I want to bind that peace in such a way and make it very, very serious that I'm giving you one of my daughters, the princess, that you harem or have in your harem to protect. And as long as she is protected, then the peace between us is coherent. It's solid, sort of thing." And so your job as the king, in that case, so King Solomon, wasn't to necessarily sleep with him, although that was maybe a cultural practice. I can't quite remember. The actual purpose was, you better protect what's in your harem. What has been haremed, what has been bound before God, is extremely important to protect. And if you were to fail that, you could go to war because of it. So it was a very serious thing. But it was also more of a tradition, right? And so one of the laws of God is to honor your father and mother, is to recognize the source by which you even have life and to respect that, and to take care of them as much as they have taken care of you, sort of thing. And so family in this culture is very important. But what they would say to kind of get around actually having to take care of their parents, like they didn't have old folks home and everything like that. They were a part of your family. You had them in the same household very often. What they would say is, well, I have this inheritance, or I have this thing that I've made in business, and rather than take care of the old fart and the old lady that was kind of bogging you down, right? They would harem it and give it to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, or you kind of get a legal loophole so they wouldn't have to actually take care of their parents. And that's what he's basically talking about here, is like these religious leaders who are all high and mighty have been kind of falling down on their basic human duty from the law's point of view because of their tradition of hareming things, sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of off the top of my head. If I remember correctly, that's how it worked. Question on that, if allowed, absolutely. Feel free to ask your question about the game. Well, it's not a game, but that's okay. I'm here to provide information. That's fine. Yeah, absolutely. What was your question there, Coco? To what degree does a child respect and honor their parents? An example, the parents were abusive and etc. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess it depends on in what way a person needs to respect their parents, right? There is a fundamental reality. It's kind of like let's take the position of the earth, right? Just as an example. To what degree should you respect the earth? I mean, the earth does a lot of terrible things, technically, right? The planet. Like, sometimes it'll send blizzards and storms and floods and everything like that to really destroy, like, really, truly destroy the people who live on it. And yet, without that planet, without the actual fundamental existence of it, we would have nothing to stand upon. And so, I think to treat like this on a very fundamental level, to treat our parents, regardless of who they are and what they've done, they are still the DNA. They are still the pillars on which we even have life in the first place. And so there's a level of respect that is at least should at least be acknowledged. Now, what does it mean to respect, though? It's to acknowledge the role and the importance that person or planet, whatever it is, what that person has a role in your life, and to treat it accordingly. You don't go out of your way to demean it. You don't go out of your way to destroy it. You don't go out of your way to strain it or anything like that. It is essentially treated in the same way as one ought to treat your neighbors. So fundamentally, from Jesus's point of view, who is my mother and who is my brother, right? Is what we kind of talked about earlier in Matthew, what he had said. And he said, anybody who does the will of my Father is my mother, my brother, my sister, and in that way, we should treat those people with the love and care at all times, right? Those are the fundamental people that we should love. And then at that point, so that's our family. That's our true people who we sacrifice for. We go out of our way to make sure that they're protected and that we have relationship with. And then if we put that aside, the question is, even if our biological parents are our enemies, how do we treat our enemy? We still treat them with respect. We still love our enemies, right? We turn the other cheek. We still go out of our way to respect and to show what love is. Now, that's not to say that we go and roll over and do everything they want or to take abuse. That's not what Jesus is telling us to do. But it is still, our actions ought not to exemplify the negative, but to put forward what is positive. And that's done in a way of faith, in trust, that regardless of what other people do, you have responsibility, you have the power to do good. You have the power to honor God, to respect our parents, respect the earth, respect, the basis of things. And so I would say that to me is probably a good perspective on it. To get to the more specific things, if a parent is abusing their child, then I think the respectful thing, the loving thing, is to not go along with sin, to not propel people into that situation. Sometimes the loving thing is to separate a parent from their child and to address whatever it is with that parent, whatever is driving them to cause harm, whether it's verbal or physical or anything like that. And so respect doesn't mean just taking a beating, right? It's a recognition of the holiness, the image of God in an individual, regardless of who they are, particularly in a parent, and the role they play in your life, but care for that person in a way that they don't pile on sin upon themselves. So if you were to just roll over and get your ass kicked by your parents or something like that, or whoever it is, but like in this particular case, like what you're doing is you're allowing sin to multiply by not addressing it, by not combating it, by not seeking justice, by not seeking help from others and say, hey, this is actually wrong. And it's not just wrong because I'm hurt. It's wrong because this person is hurting people. And probably, and this is what I usually say, is most of the time, people who are hurting others, they themselves have been hurt and they need healing, right? And it's it needs to be contextualized that way, or it ought to be for the most part. There are certainly outliers who are there are people who are just absolute psycho and sociopathic, people that maybe should be set aside, in facilities and stuff like that. But I would say that's much less than we think. Most people hurt people is what I like to say. And so there's a difference between respect and what would you say, allowing evil, I guess. Right. So yeah, I don't know, what do you think, Lunar?
Well, especially if that individual is abusive and disrespectful towards you, doesn't necessarily give you permission to disrespect them back.
Right.
But as I guess Jesus teaches, turn the other cheek, forgive them, and move on, kind of thing. You don't have to take it, but you can walk away.
Right.
In a way.
Right.
But without hate in your heart.
Yeah. We have the responsibility to really deal with ourselves, and in our own stuff. In the end, the only person who can not help you, but can change who you actually are and who you want to be. You have control of that. You have the ability to alter your own destiny, your own future, and everything like that. You can't really control other people.
Right.
Hopefully your good actions and your good speech will promote that. And that's not but fundamentally you just have responsibility for what you do. And that's the way I look at it,
Good way to put it.
Yeah. We'll get to this in, I think it'll be in Paul's letters. He might say it in Romans if I remember correctly, but the way in which one ought to deal, and this, I'm going to apply this, I usually apply this to everybody, but it's in context, it's specifically for how we ought to treat people in the church. And this is something that does not happen. And it's what really bothers me about large, physical church locations and pastorates and stuff like that. And, but what Paul basically says is, if you have a problem with your brother, or a member in the church, essentially, go to that person directly and address whatever the problem is. Say, hey, I have this issue with you. Do it in a way that is loving, but address it. Speak what's true, that you understand it. And if the guy says, go F yourself, or is like, I'm not doing that, or he says, you're gaslighting me, or something stupid like that, which I hate the word gaslight, for the record. I just can't stand it, because it doesn't solve anything. It just basically suddenly, makes you the perpetrator by calling you the gaslighter. And it's hard to get out of the tangled weeds of that language, But so Paul basically says, okay, if he tells you to go F yourself, then take somebody that you both know and probably knows the situation, or at least understands both of the heart of those people, and bring him into the conversation. So in other words, have a mediator or a moderator kind of thing. Say, hey, we're having this issue. Can you come with me and let's just come in love and let's actually have this three-way conversation, and let's address the issue that we have. Usually it has something to do with whether that person is committing some adultery or some crazy sin. But I think this is true of anything, any possible conflict that you can think of. This is the way one ought to bring it. And I put this in the same category as if your parents are abusing you, or parents are doing something bad. It's hard to do, but that's why you don't do it alone if it doesn't work one-to-one. So you bring somebody else in. Then he basically says, okay, and if the guy still says, no, go F yourself, you bring more people in. You bring in the elders, the people who have the wisdom. They're old. They've gone through some of this stuff. They know how to really handle some of these, kind of touchy subjects. So you bring those guys in. And then if the guy still says, go F yourself, you bring in the entire family, the entire community who knows this guy. And that you can't possibly miss a facet of the complex gem of the problem, right? They're all looking from different angles, and you all have this discussion, and only then, if the guy still says, go F yourselves, do you consider something which the church has historically called excommunication, which just means you are put from a brother or a family member into a category that is now a stranger. But that doesn't mean you hate them. The way we treat our neighbors is the way we treat ourselves. So you still love the guy, but you say, hey, look, we want to make it very evident to you that what you are doing is not okay, from hundreds of people potentially, or at least dozens of people. We all agree, hey, this isn't really good for you, and this is really not good for us, and you're doing something that's evil, that is, if we were to allow it in our community and we were to say that you are our brother, then we are represented by your actions. And so we're going to put you outside of our community publicly, not to shame you. Hopefully shame will still be there, and you will repent and come back, and you'll be welcomed with open arms, right? But the fundamental thing is, we don't support this person's negative behavior. If it's abusing a kid, absolutely the same thing. We excommunicate in hopes that they repent and will be able to come back into the family once they do so. But even then, the primary way that we treat our neighbors is the way we treat ourselves, with love. We still care for people. And that's the same in this particular case. I would say that's the exact same way you should treat, a parent who might be abusive and stuff like that. Is you need help. You can't do it alone. You shouldn't do it alone. We're called, so we'll eventually get there. We call it the body of Christ, right? It's like when one cell or one part of the body hurts, we all hurt. If you feel your arm, somebody stabs your arm, trust me, it's like it takes all the energy of the body from foot to head, to like make sure that thing gets healed again, right? And same thing on the organic cell level. It's like we are meant to, to care for the whole thing. So it is important to be a part of a community at some level. So. Anyway, that was probably a very long answer to that, but I thought, to me, it's a very serious question, so I wanted to make sure I answered it thoroughly.
Sure.
But okay, hopefully that answered it. If you want to continue here, we are over here on verse 10.
Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" He replied, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots." Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. Peter said, explain the parable to us. Are you so dull? Jesus asked them. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile them.
Interesting. There's a couple of points I'll make. Just one of them's a funny thing. So to me, this is why I think Jesus has a really, really great sense of humor. For the first part, Peter says, "Explain the parable to us," and he goes, "Are you still so dull?" And I think he's saying that facetiously because the name Peter literally is translated to rock, and so, hey, rock, are you still so dull? You know, and so I really think that's a very small detail that I think most people would probably miss, but when you understand the actual the way that the Greek language and the Hebrew language are being kind of played with here. Anyway, it's just one of those small details that I think just shows the character of Jesus more than I don't think of him as just like a purely holy, like, you know, oh, I'm so above you and everything I say, you know, my poop don't stink. Like, there's some people who still don't believe that Jesus ever took a poop. And it's like, the guy is human. The guy is fully human. I guarantee you his pits stink like yours, you know? So anyway, so I just think it's one of these funny little things. I think I see his humor, and maybe it's me reading into it some. But anyway, so it's just a little.
That's great.
The thing that I don't want to overemphasize what's said here, but I do think it's important to recognize that what he says is, don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? And then he says, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them, or rather that person. So the question that I usually bring up here, or maybe it's an emphasis I shouldn't, but people are responsible for the defilement of themselves more often than the world defiles them. And I don't want to push that too much, but this is where I tend to get my perspective on things when it comes to hate speech or you know, terrible things. That's not to dismiss them and say that they don't have an effect, but they oftentimes, I think, we defile ourselves by the things that we say more than we are defiling other people and corrupting them. At least that's where it starts. And so to me, it's important to take responsibility for what comes out of your mouth, which is why I'm pretty careful with what I say most of the time. Sometimes, you know, like anybody else, I'm a hothead. I'm loose with it, but I'm the very introspective person. And after I've said something, I really think about what I've just said and think I probably need to go back. And so the truth to me is my most fundamental value, more than love. And that's maybe a bad thing, but I think that truth is first, and then you say it, you find out what the truth is, and then you say it in love. So those two principles are connected to me. And again, love is truth, so one ought to love because it's true. But yeah, I don't know.
That does make sense.
Yeah. It's important to watch what you say. I bring this up because there's a lot of people who, and I'm not denouncing people or anything like that, even lots of friends that I have who say extremely positive things that are said in a well-meaning and hopeful way, but it's very often not true. And that bothers me, even to the point, like, even the point of people saying something like, you're the most amazing person in the world. Like, that sounds nice, and I know that it's meant as edifying and lifting people up, but it's also not true. And so for me, I what I would rather say is something that is specific and true that also edifies, right? And I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit of a proselytizer for this kind of behavior, but I don't see it enough. I see people doing these very generic, broad, oh, they're just the best person in the world, I love them to death. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't love them to death. You don't even know this person. You've met them once. You talked to them 4 times on Discord. You know, it's like, relax. Say what you really mean. It's like, oh, man, I've had a really great conversation with this person the other day. It was about this thing. Get specific. Edify specifically a person. Mm-hmm. To me, that is, anyway, to me, that's much more worthwhile. So
I had a friend earlier today saying, you are one of my closest friends. I'm always here for you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds pretty true. Yeah, in my eyes. I mean, it's not over embellished. It's
no, it's good. True. So anyway, rant over. I promise. You get my point. You get my point, right? It's like I do think people need to watch what they say and speak well. Okay. Shall we continue?
The faith of a Canaanite.
Canaanite, yep.
Canaanite woman. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to that region of Tyre. Mm-hmm.
Or Tyre.
I want to say Tyre because of...
yeah, no, Tyre or Sidon. Tyre is another way to say it.
A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed within that moment.
So this is kind of the interesting thing. So the Canaanites have their story goes all the way back to the story of Cain and Abel, right? So Jesus's line is actually from the Sethites. So the third child of Adam and Eve, supposedly, right? But Abel was the firstborn, and Cain was the second, if I remember correctly. And he essentially got jealous of the offering that his brother gave, which was always thought to be like, I brought vegetables and Cain brought the first of his livestock. He brought a sheep or he was a hunter or something. I think it was sheep, if I remember correctly. And God looked favorably on Abel's offering, and Cain, he was like, yeah, I'm not blessing you, kind of thing. And he got pissed off and then murdered. He was the first murderer of his brother, or in the world, essentially, and in the stories anyway. And there's two principles that are really important for that. The reason why Cain's offering wasn't accepted probably wasn't actually because it lacked blood or anything like that. A lot of people say, oh, he's such a vicious, bloodthirsty God. It's actually specifically, it's the first fruits of Abel's livestock that he provided. And so it was the best of the best. He brought his first and best stuff to God. And, Cain was like, well, I'm a farmer. I'm going to have like my best bread, and then I'm going to give him the leftovers. That's why it was sort of like, you're not putting God first, clearly. And so why do you think he should bless you for that? Right. Anyway, so that's the moral of that story in very, 90 seconds, I guess. But the people of the Canaanites who are descended from that line were always known to be sort of more vicious, and they were cursed. So Cain got a mark on him, or the mark of Cain, they say, and it really just meant that they tended to be a people who tended to be violent, or were cursed and all that sort of thing. And so they were a people that was sort of apart from the Israelites, which were descended primarily from Seth, right? And the 12 tribes of Israel and all that, and Jacob. Anyway, and so when the idea here is that the most cursed people in the land, the Canaanites, and a woman who at that time wasn't thought of as like, the highest citizen, right? This is essentially the lowest of the low coming to him and saying, well, actually, I was sent to help the people of Israel. Like the Israelites get it first. And he's doing this likely as a test, not as a slight to people. He's just being matter of fact. Well, I was only sent to the lost sheep of Israel, right? And then he's like, look, no offense, but like, you are the lowest of the low. I'm giving bread, and I'm meant to be for the highest of the high right now, or at least that's what it seems. And she sees through what he's saying. She's not taking offense to it. She's requesting. It's like, but I've seen you do this for others. I have faith in the person who you are. And so this test, or this, this ability for her to perceive past his sort of his station, if you will, and the words that he's saying, is what allows him to say, you have amazing faith. Absolutely, your request is granted. So that's likely the way it should be taken, in my opinion. So. All right. Any questions? Anything else? Yeah.
Right. So good.
All right, go ahead.
Jesus feeds the 4,000. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on the mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame and the blind and the crippled, the mute and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them all. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. His disciples answered, Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. He then took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. After Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. Isn't this what happened in Matthew 14 as well? Or 13?
It was like Matthew 12, if I remember correctly. Let me see here. Maybe 13.
It's almost exact, like with the...
It is pretty close.
Loaves and the fish.
So the question really becomes, why say pretty much the same story? Clearly it's 2 different instances, because the first one is like there's 12 basketfuls afterwards, there's 5 fish or 5 loaves, and
it's a different area.
Yeah.
And I mean, in these particular ones, they came and he healed, and they were there for 3 days. That was a little different than the last time. He's like, oh, I don't want them to go hungry. Let's magically multiply this bread and fish.
I'm going to read this on Mark. So it says, on the miraculous feeding of 4,000 people and its relation to the feeding of the 5,000, which was previously, see the note on Mark 8:1-10. So I'm going to grab that right quick. Because this is probably the one that I've read about before, and I could probably tell you if I thought about it enough, but I don't. The question to me is, why have two of virtually the same story in a single gospel? You know, what's the point he's making here? I think my first initial thought is they already know he can do this. So, well, where could we possibly get enough bread in this remote place? Like, they already know he's done it before. So why are they asking? Are they asking because it's rude to just presume that he's going to constantly feed people? Or, you know, is he testing their faith to see, you know, I don't know. Like, I actually don't remember or don't really know myself. So I'm going to read this right quick. What did I say? 8:1-10? Because this will come up in the other Gospels eventually, but I am curious about it.
All right. I'm going to keep listening, but I got to go to the bathroom.
Sure. Many scholars question the historicity of this miracle, even if they accept the historicity of the feeding of the 5,000. The second feeding appears to be a different version of the first story, especially when in this story the disciples do not seem to be aware of the possibility of Jesus performing such a miracle. But if this is so, it is hard to account for the several distinctions between the two accounts, and for Mark's reference, or you know, in Matthew as well, to both miracles in verses 17 and 20. The disciples' lack of expectation here may be accounted for by the Gentile location, or by the disciples not anticipating Gentile participation in the Messianic banquet. And so, I mean, that makes sense, especially after this particular story of the Canaanite woman, right? And so he just said that his primary mission is to the people of Israel, to fulfill the prophecies and to fulfill everything that was foretold about the Messiah, right? And yet, nobody really knows that what his mission is meant for isn't just for Israel, but it's meant to go across the world. That he is here for all people, right? And so the miracles weren't just supposed to be done in the small territory or the footstool of where God dwells, right? He's trying to break people of their biases or of their prejudice or of their presumption of what the Messiah should be able to do or ought to do, right? So it's kind of, yeah. Anyway, I think that's it's good. That makes sense to me. Cool. All right. Well, that satisfies my curiosity. Actually, just because I have this out, I have, for those who don't know, this massive Apologetics Bible that I use. So it's a Bible that's been compiled. So it's called the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and it is kind of between for translation purposes, it's between the idea of thought for thought and word for word, which just basically means that the way that they translate is they take in Hebrew or Greek, tends to be the primary ones, or sometimes it's Aramaic, and they look at the entire phrase when it comes to thought for thought and say, what is the general idea or principle being communicated in the Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic, or whatever it is. And then for word, they look at the exact word in Greek and translate the closest word they can possibly get into English. So, or whatever other language for that matter. And so the Holman Christian Standard Bible is one of those Bibles that are pretty close to the middle. They use for the best possible purpose in getting the heart of whatever the text is meaning to bring about. That's how they seem to translate it, and I can appreciate that. There are some words that there are no equivalents in English, right? That like love is a very good example, and I say this, I probably say this a lot, but There are like 9 words for love, or like 7 words or something like that, in Greek. You know, there's agape, there's eros, there's philo, there's there's a couple. I just can't remember them all. But you know, to translate them all to the word love, because that's really the only word love we actually have, would be disingenuous most of the time. So we have to find a more, you know, specific. So agape would be self-sacrificing love by which you would put upon the importance upon the other person, so much so that you would sacrifice, or not demean, but, you know, you take a part of yourself. That's how much you love them, is to give them yourself. That's agape love. Whereas brotherly love is, or you know, brotherly love is sort of like a fraternity, you know, like like just kind of, we kind of hang out, we really love each other, we respect each other, we honor each other, but it's not necessarily like we're one above the other. It's we are equal kind of thing, or we're bros kind of thing. And, you know, anyway, you get the idea. So Holman Christian Standard Bible is kind of in the middle of those two translations. But what they've done is it's a study Bible. So in the margins at the bottom, they've written, there's a bunch of scholars, usually apologists or biblical scholars, who kind of break down some of the lesser known facts or context of things, as well as sometimes they'll have articles in here, sort of coming across sort of the regular challenges that come to Christianity. You say, well, if God is so powerful, why can't he just make everybody happy, or something, you know, that's facetious, or, you know, and so they'll have little articles and stuff in here about that. So anyway, you get the point. I'm just quickly looking to see if there's anything that popped out on my notes here. Yeah, it's good. Okay, shall we tackle another one?
Sure, but you'll have to read because I'm still indisposed.
It's all good. It's all good. All right, Matthew 16. The demand for a sign. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'Today it will be a stormy, for the sky is red and overcast.' Do you know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you can't interpret the signs of the times? A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Jesus then left them and went away. So Jesus is kind of like a little fed up at this point, I suspect, right? So it's like he's sitting there doing miracles, you know, showing everything he could possibly do to authenticate his teachings, you know, talking in parables and then revealing those parables to his closest inner circle. And yet his, you know, and then these Pharisees and Sadducees come around and be like, you know, show us a trick, be our performing monkey, you know, come on, let's go, give us some, you know, show us that you're amazing, show us that you're this godly character and stuff like that. Come on, yeah, go ahead, you know. And he's like, dude, I could bring down fire from the sky and you wouldn't believe me. It's an adulterous, besides it's an adulterous and faithless, you know, wicked generation that wants this stuff, that wants some amazing, you know, overpowering thing to convince them. But I'll give them one. The only one that I'll give them is the sign of Jonah. And so the sign of Jonah is hearkening back to the story of Jonah and the quote unquote whale. Wasn't a whale, just for the record. There's no whales in the Sea of Galilee or in the area of the Red Sea and all that. So it was probably a big fish, you know. Think like a really big mackerel or tuna or something crazy like that, more than like an actual whale. So Pinocchio, sorry, probably didn't happen. So the story of Jonah, very quickly, is essentially there's this plan that God has for a guy named Jonah to go and talk to like this really nasty city called Nineveh, right? We've kind of mentioned it a couple of times, but Nineveh was like this it was basically it was Mos Eisley from Star Wars, you know, a place of scum and villainy, you know. That's basically what Nineveh was. And God basically tells this Jonah guy, he says, yo, go tell these guys that I'm kind of choked at them and they'll repent. Or rather, he's just go tell us. He's like, yeah, no, I don't really want to do that, because if I tell you that, then they'll repent. And I really don't want them to repent. I want them to go to hell. Nineveh sucks. They are garbage. And if I go and tell them, they'll probably actually repent and they'll be great. And so he runs away from his duty. And long story short, God kind of punishes him for it, you know, and says, no, you're going to do what I want you to do, kind of thing. And gets swallowed by a whale. And he was in there for 3 days. And then after 3 days, he comes out of it. And so this is a chance for Jesus to kind of share a metaphor or a parable to the Pharisees and Sadducees, or the people who are there, and possibly get some to wake up to the idea. They might take it literally, right? The sign of Jonah is to be in a fish for 3 days. That's kind of weird, you know, but the fish was always meant to be a representative of death, right? It's like, I'm going to kill you for 3 days. You might as well be dead, right? For 3 days. And he's kind of giving them a bit of a heads up, like, I'm going to be dead for 3 days. And that's the sign I'll give you. That's the miracle. The one miracle that's actually important that Jesus did. Truly, you know, that rocked everything. Because it's the only miracle that makes a difference. Anybody can, not anybody, but most of the signs and miracles and stuff that Jesus performs, one might be able to say, okay, they set this up or whatever. It's really hard to pull off what Jesus does later on in the story here on the cross, right? And what came after that. It's a pretty hard case. And some people still deny it and everything like that, but very unlikely, nevertheless. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense.
I'm back.
All right. If you want to continue.
The yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. When they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, Jesus said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They discussed this among themselves and said, it is because we didn't bring any bread. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he was not telling them to guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. That reminds me, you were saying before where like the fish and the bread didn't necessarily symbolize actual food.
Right.
They weren't hungry for food. Nothing.
And this also goes back to one of his parables that he said earlier as well, probably in chapter 13 or 14, which was the idea that yeast can go through an entire loaf of bread or go through an entire pound of dough or what have you, right? And that works 2 ways. And this is where I'll push back on what I said earlier about my own perceptions, is that the teachings of people, the things that come out of people's mouth, can go far and wide. It can go throughout an entire society quickly, you know, whether it's true or not, whether it's good yeast or bad yeast, right? So that's kind of what he's guarding against here too, is, hey, be aware of the yeast spreading, the words or the actions, the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Because if people started to do what they did, they're clearly hypocrites. They're clearly not well. And so I want to be careful to say that your words have no import or have no effect on people, and that you are not affected by the things that people say. I say that because I'm responsible for the things that I say, right? But not for what people do. Nevertheless, right? I recognize that I have a, to me, anybody, look, I'll say this, and this is probably true of anybody on this platform or any other platform who has an audience or has a relationship with people, you have some effect on what your words are telling these folks. And maybe that's why I'm probably a little bit harsher on being careful for what you say. Anyway, not just because you actually have a responsibility. There are consequences for yourself, I think, whether eternally or temporally, for the things that come out of your mouth. But you are affecting people. So just be aware of that if not responsibility, then that power, whatever that may be. So hopefully you're doing so in a heart that is not vindictive or greedy or whatever,
Right.
So anyway, again, ranting. All right, this is a cool part.
Peter declares that Jesus is Messiah. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi,
Yep, something like that.
He asked his
Caesarea.
Caesar salad.
Yep, Caesarea, something like that.
Anyway, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah.
I like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. That is interesting.
It's like saying, "I tell you that you are stony, and on this stone I will build my church." It's kind of the way I like that. There's a lot of, so this is where the traditions clash between Protestantism and Catholicism. Catholics would say, the papacy, for example, the Pope, is a direct spiritual descendant. Maybe not literal, like physically related, but spiritually, they have a direct descendancy from Peter, so that they have the authority on earth. They have the keys to the kingdom, right? To allow somebody to be welcomed into the kingdom or not, right? That is not what Protestants believe. So I'm of that tradition. I don't really believe that that's true. I think the papacy and the people of the Catholic Church are just as fallible and just as likely to screw something up doctrinally, right? So from a doctrinal point of view, or from a rules if you want to call it, point of view from theology and such. That's not to say that there like we stand upon the shoulders of giants in the Catholic Church, in the tradition that has come back from us. So I definitely do not dismiss that. But I don't think that that's a right translation or interpretation of what it means to hold the keys of the kingdom and everything like that. It's more like it's a recognition of, so there's this idea of a castle, right? And so one of the things that Jesus will talk about later is something called the capstone, or the cornerstone specifically, right? The cornerstone was the primary stone in a building of a castle or a large structure back in the old days that everything built off of. It was the main pillar, essentially, the first stone that you would lay, and it tended to be huge. It was like massive, you know. In the greatest castles, you'd be like, you know, you'd take 50, 60 people to lift this thing, right? And so Jesus effectively says that I'm the cornerstone, or I'm the capstone, right? And what I think he's saying here, the translation ought to be, is the next rock on top of me is this guy. This guy, and the way he has, what he has just said right now, the fundamental idea of who I am, those words and that confession of faith, that confession or understanding of who Jesus is, it's upon this fundamental idea and the person and his character and what he does that I will start building my church upon, right? And so that guy, you know, he's the one who's like the first stone, and then you start building the castle, a bunch of other rocks, other individuals who have the same faith, to create the kingdom, the castle, whatever you want to call it, right? I don't think there's a spiritual. I don't see it. To me, I don't see how you know, a single individual has that power. He's the power that he has is the confession of faith, right? Is the confession of that Jesus is the Son of God. That's the key. And so anybody who says that, they've got a key, essentially, right? They recognize, or they have that ability. And so this idea of binding in heaven and loosing on earth is more about, from my perspective anyway, the idea of you bind people in heaven, as in you clutch them, like they are bound and they are held into the highest good, right? And loosing on earth is being loosed from the terrestrial dangers, primarily death, right? So whatever you say is bound in heaven and loosed on earth means that they are bound to the highest good eternally and free from death terrestrially, you know, on earth. And those are the fundamental ideas of what that means. So far as I'm concerned, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the I think that's the appropriate translation of that idea. And so we're all stones in the kingdom, right? We all have the same. If you
exactly,
yeah, if you have that confession, you are a part of that castle kind of thing. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we're getting spicy.
Jesus predicts his death. Oh. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. That reminds me of something I was going to say earlier. The 3 days thing is super. It comes up a lot, like not eating for 3 days and all of that. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom."
That's an interesting line to end, but I won't get there yet. But yeah, this is what I love about this is Jesus just like seconds ago, basically said, "This is the guy. This is the guy right here." He is the maximum. Like, I'm building my kingdom on this dude, right? On what he said, that's the guy. And then he says, "Yeah, but I'm probably going to die." And the guy instantly says, "No, that's not happening." And Jesus' response is like, "You're the worst."
Get behind me, Satan.
Yeah, literally. Like, that's the harshest. Can you imagine any harsher thing for somebody who's left their entire family, like, he had a family. Peter has from what we know, Peter did have a family at the time. He was a fisherman, probably a pretty bad one, based on what you see in the text later, like, leaves everything to follow this guy, is told he's the number one guy in his army, if you want to call it an army, but in his followers, right? And then is basically shot down a second later, like, that's devastating, which suggests to me that what Jesus is saying is extremely important, that his death is actually necessary, and to try and take him away from that mission that he has accepted it's akin to Satan. And I say that because it's actually exactly what Satan was trying to do, right? Like, in the beginning, in chapter 4, when he went out in the desert, what was Satan doing, right? It's like, "Well, just bow down to me, I'm going to test you, right? I'm going to try and get you away from whatever you're supposed to be doing out here. I'm going to screw with you." And it's in the same heart. What he just basically is saying is like, you are afraid of me. You are afraid of the truth. You are afraid, or you are hateful of what I'm actually about. And so then he goes on this sort of discussion, right? "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it." There's a reason why he came, and that reason was to die. And so we'll get into that. Why did he have to die? Why did Jesus have to do all this? We'll get into that, and I've touched on it to some degree, but
I hear almost every day, or like every other day, it's like Jesus died for our sins.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what does that mean? And it's I could go into a little bit if you want, like, it's like what that means, because I don't want to like push it off, but look, the idea here is that fundamentally each individual person is responsible for their actions and their words, right? And that whatever you put out there, whatever's negative and everything like that, if you had to pay those negative things with the blessing of the life that you've gotten, whatever it is, small blessing or big blessing, right? If what you've chosen to do takes a tax on somebody, and you're called to account for every negative thing that you've ever done, your bill, if you really think about it, if you started adding up, just add up the last 7 days of shit just by your own standard that you've done that is wrong, and you had to pay for it in, like, let's say a dollar amount or a time amount. I deserve like 5 days in jail for that. I deserve, $50 for screwing that guy over, whatever it is, right? the bill will come for your entire life to be something that you can't possibly pay for, right? And so you owe something because of those actions, right? Even if you were to balance it out with the good things you've done, which of course people have done that. Like everybody's done good things, you know? But then it's also balanced with, well, did you do those good things purely out of the goodness of your heart or because you're hoping to get something out of it? So I gave my mom a really nice birthday gift, hoping that she would forget about something I did before. Well, that's technically another bad action. I'm getting too far into it. So the idea is that you need another, like if you didn't want to live in jail forever because of all the bad shit that you've done, right? Then you would need somebody to take your place. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna take that guy's place. And that's actually a practice that was allowed back in the past. Was this what do you call it? There's a particular word for it. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it's like an exchange. So you can exchange or you can cop up. And it used to be, the tradition used to be based on the family. So the father, for example, if he did something wrong, they talked about the sins of the father, go on to the son kind of thing, right? And it was a concept that if the son was good enough, he could pay for the sins of the father. Right? And so the hope of having children was for that they would do better than you did, and you could atone for all the shit that you've done in your life, and your father's father, and your father's father's father, and so on and so on and so forth, right? And so it got to the point in this story where people have been trying to do that. The highest of the highest good people, maybe probably exemplified in the person of King David. They all fell short. We all fall short of the glory of God, of the standard of goodness. Whether we make that standard or not, whether God gives us that standard, it doesn't matter. We all fall short. And we basically have to pay something. Now, that's not meant to make us feel like shit. It's just true, right? It's just the reality. It's like if I start scooping up scoops of my flesh and throwing into the garbage, right? Well, I'm missing part of myself. I'm missing pieces. It's not harsh to say so, right? It's just true, right? And so
ashes, we all fall down.
Right. And so then the other line that we'll get to is the idea that the wages of sin is death, right? The consequence of our failure to be what we have the actual capacity to be. We do have the capacity to be good in theory. We just never are. Right? We always choose something selfish, or we always choose to do something negative. And so the wages of sin is death. And so if we don't want to die, we need to if we don't want the death penalty, we need somebody to die for us. And so the idea was, and this sort of goes back to the story of Abraham and Isaac, right? So Abraham goes up with his son Isaac on the mountainside because God says, sacrifice your son. Sacrifice the thing you love the most, right? And in that same way, it's because if you do so, the life that you owe for the crimes that you've committed, crimes, sins, whatever, negative things you've done, can be atoned for by that. And just before Abraham takes that knife, God's like, whoa, hold up. I got something else in mind. Don't do that. You're good. That's your son. Right? And so everybody sees that story and they're like, what the that's fucking weird, man. So, and understandably so. But this is going back to that now. And it's the idea that God so loved the world, so loved every person, that he sent his son to die for you, for the individual. And so he takes our place for the wages of sin that we have racked up. Like a credit card that we stole from dad. It's like, well, I'll just put it on that credit card. I'll just keep on putting on that credit card. I sinned, but don't worry, I'll put it on the credit card, right? And so the question is like, how can one human being die for the entire world? And that's when the actual important part of recognizing that one human being, whether it's your son, whether it's your father, whether it's anybody, can't actually pay in their own singular lifetime for what is good for two reasons. One, because they aren't good. They have to be good. They have to have no debt themselves, right? And 2, because they're only one individual. At worst, even if you did find a perfect person to take your place, they would have to be willing to die for you, and they could only die for you. They couldn't die for your brother, they couldn't die for your sister, they couldn't die for anybody else. Which is why it's so important that Jesus is not just human, but he is also God. That he is infinite himself, that he is not only perfectly good, that he has done good his entire life, which is this whole thing that we're experiencing here, is that he's been a faithful son, that he's done everything he can to be good, but he's also God and is able to, by his death, account for the sins of all people everywhere throughout the temporal time in space. And that's why it's such a big deal. Somebody who did not deserve to die, who in every possible way should have been the one to be rewarded, was instead taken and killed, buried, and then, because God is God, he saved his son. He rose him on the 3rd day. I'm not going to lie, as a believer, I never truly realized the magnitude of his love. He loved the world so much, he gave his only son until Koku got a son. Yeah. And so God did everything in his power to set it up so that we could do good, wouldn't, but wanted to show that he loved us so much regardless of all the crap. It doesn't matter what you've done, right? That you can still come to him and say, we're starting over. We're starting a fresh slate. And that's not just I sinned up to today and then I accept Jesus and then tomorrow I make a mistake and now I have to deal with that mistake. So Jesus has to die again. No, it's a whole temporal thing. It's a recognition for time and in past and future kind of thing, right? So, but here's my point. So to go back to what we're reading here, if Jesus didn't do that, everybody's dead. Everybody throughout all of time. And so for Peter to say, you can't die, that's a terrible, no, we're never letting that happen. He's like, no, you're Satan right now. You don't understand what I'm here for. It is important. Like, really important. Get behind me, Satan.
That's why I said this merely human concerns and not the concerns of God.
Right.
Just this, your thoughts are on this one life in existence, and there's so much more to that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, look, trust me, you could get this entire planet right now. You could have the entire universe, eternal life as you are, and it's not a good thing. Don't run away from this. It's not, look, as the state of existence as it is right now, it needs to change. Don't go away from this. If you try and run from it, you're going to lose your life. But if you bite the bullet, and this is probably true on a lot of stuff in our lives, when shit really hits the fan and when things are really tough, if you can just keep pushing through, if you can just keep on taking one step at a time through all of that stuff, it's the same basic principle, right? You'll still gain from that experience. You'll be able to get through whatever it is. But if you run from it, it's going to be on your heels the entire time. Whatever suffering and pain and death that is in your life, if you keep going away from it, it's still going to haunt you. It's not like you're going to be able to outrun it, right? But by going through that stuff, especially if you have a community with you and people and faith and trust in God, then you'll be able to get through that stuff, and there is a reward intrinsically in doing it. You don't do it for the reward. That's not what he's saying here, right? That your Father in heaven will reward each person according to what they've done. Like, as in, okay, congratulations, here's your badge. You already have it. It's yours. Just go through it. It's there, So.
Let's talk about the last line of this chapter. This verse.
Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. Now, there's a few I'm going to bring out the book for this one, but I'll say what I think it is from the top of my head.
Sure.
My understanding of it is it has to do with the idea that within the generation that they exist in, right? So the people who are with them within that generation of men who are following him at the moment, and there's a couple women too, of course, that they will see the culmination of the point of why he's here, and that his sitting on his throne, if you will, right? What the whole kingdom of God really is, that will start to be or will be established and moving outward and growing before some of these people. Some of them will, he says, probably will die, right? But he's basically, there's still some who will see that. They will see that culmination. So the suggestion is that from a historical point of view, it's actually usually the fall of Jerusalem that the Son of Man's kingdom technically is fulfilled in its prophecy. And that the recognition that God's kingdom isn't a place, it's not a temple, and it's not a terrestrial location, but it's a people. And it's about 70 AD when the fall of Jerusalem happens. The Romans decimate the entire city, melt down the entire temple. There's like the way, anyway, so they pull down all the bricks of the temple of Israel, and it forces people who are Jesus followers to go away from a small nation out into the Roman Empire through the Roman roads that were created. And it's then that Christianity truly takes off, and nations across the entire Middle East and then beyond, eventually in Europe and in Africa. Actually, Africa is probably one of the earliest ones, like Ethiopia. That's when Christianity basically begins to build, and it's a recognition that God's kingdom, or the Son of Man and the faith in him, that's when his kingdom takes off and starts to be established. And there's people who are still alive to see the fall of Jerusalem. So anyway, I think I'm right.
Yeah, let's check your book.
Mark 9:1. Yeah, let's take a look. Jesus intended. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Jesus reassured his disciples that he was not entirely rejecting Peter's expectations of a powerful Messiah. Some of them would experience a foretaste of the glorious revelation of the Son of Man in their lifetimes. A promise made good to Peter, James, and John immediately in the Transfiguration story. All further experienced the power of the kingdom with the coming of the Spirit on Pentecost. That's fair. I mean, that's probably a better. That's not better. I wouldn't say the better. I think that's a partial fulfillment of what Jesus is saying here. So the idea that what sanctified and authenticated Jesus and his kingdom was the Holy Spirit, and so the Holy Spirit is a gift that we get, essentially, which is that communication of love, that power, that experience of God. To each disciple that Jesus clearly has access to. So that's fair. Yeah. Cool.
I'm wondering what it means. Like, the part that stood out to me was some who are standing here will not taste death before they see Son of Man coming in his kingdom.
Like, is there any specific? Is it just poetic to say taste death, or?
In a way, it's like,
yeah,
some who are standing here will not taste death, meaning they won't experience death before. I think that's probably what it means. I would say that poetically speaking, what he's probably suggesting here is that death isn't the final thing, right? So to taste death is to die physically, but not necessarily be consumed by death, right? Okay. So it's a recognition that death is in fact a temporary thing, according to Jesus, and so that's especially true for, they call, I think later on, I can't remember if it's a biblical thing or just a Christian thing that people say, I can't remember, but they'll say there's a second death, right? Which is this idea of hell or what have you, right? So you will taste death initially, but you will be consumed by death, and there will be permanent
later on, whether that's a true death, quote unquote, whether that's a a state of hell, or those are again conversations we can.
That's fair.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, I think that's probably what he's alluding to, is death isn't a permanent thing, so you'll just taste death rather than consume it or be consumed by it, kind of thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, those are the 2 chapters I had planned for. Hopefully that was relatively informative and interesting today. I think that's probably where
for sure.
We'll end it. Yeah. I don't know. Oh, Grace is still going.
Looks like it.
Would it be weird to... Look, here's the thing. Grace is playing a game called Cult of the Lamb, which is pretty satanic kind of looking, I gotta tell you.
Pretty satanic.
And
in a cute way.
It's very cute, and it's very fun. It's kind of reminiscent of, like, to me it reminds me of like Legend of Zelda, Stardew Valley, Don't Starve with Friends, that kind of thing.
Don't Starve reminds me a little bit.
That conundrum. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, but here's the thing. I don't really have a problem interacting with stuff like that, and it's because I believe myself to be mature enough to recognize it for what it is. You can have those themes, you can have your fun tarot cards and games and everything like that. It is a game. But yeah, fundamentally, the whole look, I don't think people are going to suddenly join, and praise Satan tomorrow because they're watching the game. And even more so, if we can share our own hearts and our own entertainment and everything like that with what's going on, that's always fun as well. Hey, it's I just realized I didn't have stream avatars open this whole time. Oh well. I'm so used to having little people walking around, I never even noticed on screen today. Hi, Allie. Very fun. But yeah, thanks so much, guys, for hanging out. I am, of course, Zella. This was Lunar Smiles, and thanks for participating in Amateur Apologetics. Until next time, stay holy. See ya.